Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. It has been a year and 3 weeks since I have done the weekly news hour, and I know it's been really tough. And I had talked about doing it at the end of last year, and I ran promos, and I had to dial it back and be like, I don't want to do it if it's not sustainable. And the last year has been really tough. So I haven't written a ton about this, but I will. I want to. Um, where um, I have been going through long COVID the last 2 years, so I was kind of late to the party. I got COVID for the first time in February, I want to say, of 2022, and I had no symptoms or anything like that. And it was just kind of, I felt kind of bad for a couple days, and then but I tested for it and didn't come back positive, but I seemed to have all the signs. And not too long after that, I had started with really terrible chronic fatigue, and I was sleeping a lot. I could literally only function at all for 4 or 5 hours a day. Of course, this happens in the middle of my getting my Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And so my focus was really on that and kind of doing what I could with the business. Um, and which was fine. We grew in 2022 a lot. We've grown a lot over the last couple years. There's a lot more people reading the Cameron Journal than ever before, and listening and watching, and thank you all so much for coming to my little corner of the internet. Um, and uh, and so I'd gotten to the end of my graduate program. I had mostly recovered. I had switched to doing more video on the podcast. I think I was doing, sort of sporadically, but I took a lot of time off in 2022, 2021 as well, but also 2022. And then I went to a graduation party with my cohort because we didn't really get much of a graduation. Our graduation was over Zoom. And I went to a party with everybody. We did all the precautions. We tested. Everyone was vaxxed, all this type of thing. Boom, got COVID. Full symptoms, full misery, never been sicker, and it was just a huge setback. Chronic fatigue came back, insomnia became a part of my life. And I was never a good sleeper. I have delayed onset sleep disorder, so I didn't go to bed till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning anyway. But to then not be able to sleep for hours and hours and hours, and to have kind of this these, and then not being able to get up because I've slept and my schedule's all over the board, and trying to make all my meetings. And um I got a book publishing contract in 2023, and then started working day to day at that publisher as well. And so it was a lot, and I there was no way I was able to do everything I needed to do for the business, and my book publishing job, and also do the weekly news hour. And so um I am finally in a place where I can function more than 5 hours a day. I'm mostly back to sleeping on a pretty reliable schedule. Um, and uh, and I feel more confident that I'm actually able to do this and make it happen and be here for you every week with news headlines and all this type of thing. I know it doesn't seem like, well, you don't really do much now, do you? You just sit here and talk for an hour. How hard can it be? There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There's scheduling the event in advance. There is pre-marketing stuff that happens, and most importantly, after this goes out, I've got uploads to do. I make YouTube shorts of stuff, all this type of thing. And I also have to decide what news headlines I'm going to talk about, which is I really have to be digging into the news, looking for headlines, finding links, getting ready to have conversations, providing that history and context. There's a lot of kind of, stuff that goes into all of this. And so I've changed a little bit how I do the show, and how I and how I prepare for it, which is incredibly helpful. And you'll see this in new editions of the podcast that are coming, but we're in a little bit of a new studio. Um, and my new office and everything. And so it's really exciting. I'm going through a lot of transition right now. A lot of things have happened in the last year. I got sued for a photo from a post from 2018. That was fun and expensive. I went through a lot of stuff in my personal life as well. But have been growing the business and having on a lot of really great guests and producing a lot of content, and just I haven't even been writing that much. A lot of the content's been coming from my wonderful content partner. Shout out to all of you all. Um, and wonderful freelancers as well that are publishing, and we're becoming more of a publication and less about me, which is great. Um, and so it's just been a lot. It's been a journey to get back here to this place, doing this show every week for you all. Um, I just really, it's just been a lot. And the intro that I just played for you, I made a year ago in preparation for restarting the show after I moved to Delaware, and just was never able to pull that together. It was so very much, and I'm just so glad that we are here now and making it happen. And I'm gonna put a little heat on the subject because I'm a little chilly. But just so glad to finally, have all of this back together and be ready. And this week is really special because we're going to have the weekly news hour tonight, and we're doing a 6 hour live stream tomorrow. So there's a lot happening with the election and everything. And there's a lot happening in the headlines. Today on the Cameron Journal, new article is out. My kind of long form essay on the Israel Palestine situation. Lots of history, lots of context. I included some newsreel videos as well, which are very interesting, kind of Palestine when it was still a British mandate. So definitely head over to CameronJournal.com and check out that. Um, I had just recently had to kind of modify modify the link. There was an issue with that, but it's working now, so that's tremendous. And we're just so excited to be getting back to that. And I have a couple other. I just got done scheduling a bunch of stuff, so we have a lot of great new content coming out. Also, and here's the other big one. All of my audio archives from 2020 and 2021, before I shifted into video, I've now made into videos and put on YouTube. So if you're looking for classic episodes like the one on Mr. Robot, Star Trek versus Star Wars, Banks and Banking, The American Presidency, all of that is on YouTube. I'm going to be slowly posting them to the Cameron Journal over the next several months. It's going to be great. But all of that is there as well. So that's a really exciting thing to have. And I'm going to be organizing some playlists and some fun stuff like that for people to listen to. So, and those videos, I kind of posted them 4 or 5 a weekend, every weekend for about 3 months. So we just finally got done with that process in October, which was really, really great. And I've since moved again and all this type of thing. So, but we're very excited and we're very happy to be here. And this is, I think, a bit fitting, given that it is election evening, election eve, and we're talking about the news again, and we're getting back to what we all love about the Cameron Journal. So, with all that being said, enough about me and my own personal updates and issues and blah blah blah. Boring. Who cares? Let's dive into the headlines. So, actually, let me change views because we have. There we go. Get rid of that. Thanks to some other projects, I've started to do this sort of picture-in-picture thing. One of the things I wanted to talk about, sort of election adjacent, where there's some other stuff we're going to talk about, but election adjacent, was this really interesting article from Markets Insider, which is part of a Business Insider. And it says here, Coinbase CEO says Congress will be the most pro-crypto ever and pledges another $25 million in political funding. This was from last week on Halloween, October 31st. And I think it was very interesting that he kind of said that he's expecting the next Congress to be the most crypto-friendly ever, and pointed to crypto's increased relevance in the election cycle, and many candidates perceived as pro-crypto. However, down here, it says it's very interesting. It says that's a stark contrast from just a few years ago when lawmakers seemed keen on reining in the industry. He said, I feel like the crypto industry was under siege, and there was just a handful of folks in D.C. that were really trying to attack the industry. Today, it couldn't be more different, Armstrong said. He says that support in Congress will help the U.S. set up better protections for crypto investors and allow the industry to grow. And he says, I think that just means that the U.S. is more likely to get legislation passed that will allow this industry to flourish, allow investors and consumers to be protected. Then he announced that we'll pledge another $25 million into the $70.5 million in donations from Coinbase to the super PAC during the election cycle, according to campaign finance records. He says, we're going to keep showing up to protect our customers' rights and help get sensible legislation passed in major markets around the world. Trump has billed himself as the crypto president, speaking at industry events, even launching his own NFTs and a new crypto banking platform. Harris, while less vocal on her crypto position, pledged to support a regulatory framework for crypto during her Opportunity Agenda for Black Men earlier this month. Her pro-crypto stance would set her administration apart from President Joe Biden, which has pursued a strict regulatory agenda led by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I think a lot of this has to do with people have gotten used to crypto, I think, at some level. It's still tulips. It still is predicated on the greater fool that someone else will pay more for it. But the reality is you have major banks, major hedge funds, all this type of thing, who are involved in crypto, doing the crypto thing. And in that level, it's kind of here and it's here to stay, just because of the amount of money that has poured into it. I think a lot of the shift in this is also Congress. A lot of older members are starting to retire. Younger people have more of an open mind, maybe more familiar with it. However, I think the big kind of thing about this that this article doesn't address, but is worth talking about, it says Harris talked about crypto during her Opportunity Agenda for Black Men earlier this month. One of the things about crypto that kind of came out of all that was how many people of color, particularly men of color, were invested in crypto and looking at crypto to build long-term wealth. And that's been my experience as well. And let's face it, this is a new asset class that isn't being gate-kept by racial issues, by weird laws, or anything else like that. It's kind of the wild, wild west. And so I think a lot of people of color, especially black men, looking for a way to build wealth, started throwing money in crypto because it was digital, it was online, anybody could buy it. If the market goes up, it goes up for everyone. There's not a lot of the racial baggage or cultural baggage that goes along with crypto. The big problem for crypto, and the thing that Harris addressed that I thought was very interesting, was because crypto's the wild, wild west, and it is unregulated and all this type of thing, there's a chance for loss. We saw this already with the FTX collapse and the whole Sam Bankman-Fried disaster. And, a lot of, and we found out, even with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, how when you have too much money in one location, your deposits aren't insured, how to make these people whole because their money is lost, all this type of thing. Setting up something to allow crypto to continue to go and flourish, I think I'm not a fan of crypto, but I understand people that are, so I think it's important to have that set up. And I think it was interesting that she talked about that in reference to a demographic that has a lot of investments in crypto, which I also thought was interesting. Now, the other kind of niggling headline here that I thought was very interesting kind of as a complete aside, but I found this piece in the National Review. It says here the campaign against Justice Gorsuch's new book is an embarrassment, and I'm kind of like, well, his book marketing department leaves a lot to be desired. I didn't know he had a new book out, but we're gonna learn all about it. Here we go. So it says here. Gorsuch's new book is titled Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law, which he co wrote with the former law clerk Jenny Neitz. Gorsuch and Neitz argue that the explosive growth of federal law has cost not only for liberty and small government in general, but for the individual people who find themselves on the business end of all these rules and the people who enforce them. Fair enough. Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post branded it, quote, Justice Gorsuch's Book of Fishtails. An attempted smackdown by Ankush Kandorio Politico is headlined, Neil Gorsuch's new book is an embarrassment. Their primary charge is that Gorsuch left such important facts from the stories he tells in the book, chief of the story of fisherman John Yates. But Marcus and especially Kandori are the ones who should be embarrassed. They are straining to miss the point, and Kandori's piece is full of its own distortions. And then he goes on to explain why Gorsuch's position is that there's sometimes too much law. It, compresses liberty, and it would be, nice to have less of that. And basically, he's becoming a victim of the political pundit class, the chattering class. It says here that Cardori pretends the book's only argument is about the burden of incarceration. Quote, if the problem of over-enforcement had actually become ubiquitous, then Gorsuch would not have to trawl through old media stories in order to make his point. In fact, most federal criminal prosecutions are immigration, drug, and gun cases. The largest numbers of federal inmates are in custody because they were convicted of drug, weapon, and sex offenses. The story is similar in state prison systems. Roughly 90% of the inmates are in custody because they were convicted of a violent offense, property crime, or drug offense. It is true that most prisoners are in jail for these kinds of crimes, something critics of our prison system rarely acknowledge. But then it's not as if Gorsuch has never criticized government excess in immigration, drug, or gun sales either, to say nothing of criticizing civil forfeiture and supporting lawsuits against wrongful prosecutions. But the high proportion of the prison population that's locked up for the most serious crimes is partly a result of the fact that those crimes merit longer sentences. And then it kind of comes down to the most interesting case, which has to do with fish. And it says here, the centerpiece of the attack on Overruled is the book's first case study. In 2007, a state wildlife inspector, deputized by the federal government, boarded Yates's boat. This is the fisherman fellow, John Yates. Yates's boat reviewed his catch of 2,000 pounds of red grouper and identified 72 fish that the inspector measured as under the 20-inch minimum, and then imposed federal regulations for the 20-inch minimum size then imposed by federal regulations for grouper. The agent followed up when Yates returned to dock, did a second measurement, and found 69 undersized fish instead of 72. That was the last Yates heard until 3 years later, when he was raided by federal agents. He ended up being charged with 3 separate federal felonies, not for catching undersized fish, a civil violation, and by then the regulatory minimum had been dropped from 20 inches to 18 anyway, but for tampering with evidence and lying to federal agents. The government's theory was that Yates had replaced the 72 original fish with other fish from his catch, but had somehow reduced the number of measurably undersized fish by only 3 out of 72. A jury acquitted Yates of lying, but convicted him on the other 2 charges. One charge was for disposing of property after a search. This carried a statutory maximum sentence of 5 years, and the other charge carried a 20-year maximum, part of the Sarbanes-Oxley statute, enacted in 2002, following concerns about document shredding at Enron. Prosecutors asked for nearly 2 years in prison. The sentencing judge commented the prosecution had lost sight of some common sense and sentenced Yates to 30 days in prison plus 3 years of supervised release. He had to wear an ankle bracelet. His livelihood as a fisherman was destroyed, costing him what Yates estimates to be $600,000 in wages. Gorsuch and Neitz wrote that the family lost its house and, quote, now lives in a triple-wide trailer and depends on Social Security income and the extra jobs Sandra, Yates' wife, manages, unquote. Yates fought the section charge all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2014, Politico even published a lengthy op-ed by Yates himself decrying the overzealous nature of the prosecution and its legal theory. In 2015, he finally won. The court found the prosecutors had stretched the statute too far. At the time, press coverage and judicial sentiment was strongly against the government's position in Yates versus the United States. Gorsuch and Neitz tells the government spent an estimated $11 million prosecuting Yates over a difference of 3 fish. And so this is the basis of of this book. I find no, I'm not going to continue going into all the details because, as you can tell, it goes on and on and on. But I think it's interesting that Gorsuch is writing a book about this and coming out and saying, look, we need to get better about federal law. We need to have some common sense and have some discretion in how it is enforced. Discretion in law enforcement is very important. So just because a law has been violated doesn't necessarily mean you need to destroy someone's whole life for it. And this is a classic case with Three Fish that I think a simple fine would have done. Did he need to be raided? Did he need to have his whole livelihood destroyed? All this type of thing. No. And this is where a lot of small government people, rightly so, I might add, come along and say, federal overreach, way too much, gotta stop all this sort of thing. And a lot of this stuff people don't realize that if you work in fishing or timber or are, especially ranchers, all this type of thing, these people that you don't know from somewhere else can come in and absolutely bring your business to a halt without a conversation, without working together with you to figure out how to, solve this problem so that your business can continue and protect the resource, the land, in this case, the fish, all this type of thing. Instead, you get raided and your livelihood's destroyed, and there's nasty articles written about you and all this type of thing. I mean, it becomes a quite sad situation, and stories like the fisherman John Yates abound, especially out west. In out west, everyone lives in fear of the Bureau of Land Management because, as a rancher, if BLM shows up, they can shut you down entirely. That's why so many people got behind that fellow in Oregon, whose name I can't think of right now. Got behind that fellow in Oregon, who was standing up against the federal government about them trying to kill his ranching operation. This sort of thing does go on, and I think this book is a call for, we need to be better, we need to have more discretion with the law, and need to work with people better on this stuff. And I think these Politico hit pieces are just stupid. They're unnecessary. No one asked for that. Gorsuch's point is very well taken, and to not be holistic in their critique is very difficult. And there's a bit at the end here, that kind of talks about, this, and they get into the whole fish story and exactly how it was, happened and all this sort of thing. But the greater point is that both these pieces from from Politico and from the Washington Post are not fully fair to the story of Mr. Yates and his situation, or understanding the problems within federal law enforcement that can oftentimes extend far beyond those things. Mr. Yates never spent a day in jail. He had 30 days he spent 30 days in prison. And then was supervised probation sort of thing. So, and he didn't end up sitting, in jail, in prison for 20 years, all this type of thing, but he still had tremendous loss. I mean, his life has been pretty much destroyed, income taken away, all this type of thing over fish regulations. I think if you asked most people on the street, they would say that's a pretty, that's a step too far. A step too far. So, I just thought, in the midst of all the election craziness, this was an interesting anecdote and situation, and this is why I love the National Review, is because they bring up stuff like this, which is always very interesting. Getting a little bit closer to the election, I want to dash over and see what else we have. Oh yes, getting a little bit closer to the election, I wanted to take a look at this really great research from the Brennan Center for Justice, talking about the amount of states that have passed new voting laws that are affecting us this election. So, it says here, at least 9 states enacted 18 restrictive voting laws, the second highest level of output in any year since the Brennan Center began tracking such legislation over a decade ago. The highest number previous was in 2021. Louisiana is responsible for 8 of these laws. At least 4 states enacted 11 restrictive laws since the May Roundup. At least 2 states enacted 2 election interference laws, with 1 new law enacted in Louisiana since the May Roundup. They did a roundup in May before this. At least 19 states enacted 28 expansive laws. At least 9 states enacted 14 of these laws since the May Roundup. And then it also shows that between 2021 and 2024, we have 156 laws across 41 states and DC. So, how did this all start? Well, it says here, after a historic voter turnout in the 2020 election, baseless allegations of voter fraud and election irregularities sparked an unprecedented wave of legislation that made voting harder in early 2021. While the wave crested that year, it never fully receded. 2024 has been the second most active year for restrictive voting legislation in at least a decade. This fall, in more than half the states, millions of voters will face hurdles to vote that they have never before encountered in a presidential election. As discussed in a recent Brennan Center analysis, some of these laws contain multiple restrictive provisions. Most of them are around mail and absentee voting. In like the one in Pennsylvania, they can't count absentee or mail-in votes before the election day. So literally, they can't count votes. It's 7:30 right now on the East Coast. They cannot start counting votes till 12:01 tonight. Um, they also was a lot of restrictions on absentee voting. It says here 22 states will face 38 new restrictions. Voters in at least 22 states will face 38 new restrictions on their ability to vote absentee that were not in place in 2020. These new laws curtail access to absentee ballots in several ways, including by shortening the window to apply or return a mail ballot, restricting assistance in returning a mail ballot or mail ballot application, reducing the availability of mail ballot drop boxes, barring election officials from sending mail ballot applications or ballots to voters who did not specifically request them, imposing stricter signature requirements for mail ballots, and shortening the period during which voters can fix signature issues. Additionally, legislatures nationwide have passed several dozen election interference laws during this cycle. At least 14 states will have in effect 31 new laws that impose criminal or civil penalties on election workers for routine election administration, levy state authority over local election administration, enable partisan prosecution of election crimes, or make it a crime for election officials to accept third-party funding. On the other hand, many states are making voting more accessible. Throughout the last 4 years, states consistently enacted more expansive voting laws than restrictive ones in more than 3/4 of the country. At least 156 laws making it easier to vote are set to be in effect this fall. In stark contrast to states enacting voting restrictions, many states enacted laws that expanded access to mail voting. States enacted universal or no-excuse mail voting, expanded ballot request and return windows, simplified signature verification requirements, created additional ballot return options, or expanded mail voting opportunities for voters on tribal lands. States also expanded in-person early voting and made it easier to register to vote, and restored voting rights to people returning from incarceration, among other things. So, we have a map here. States that have enacted restrictive voting laws, it's throughout the whole country. As you can see, all the South, Southeast, Midwest, Mountain West, even a little bit of New England, New York. I say New England because, Vermont is there. I'm sorry, New Hampshire. That's Vermont, that's New Hampshire. New Hampshire's there. Then obviously here in, the East. So, it's there's been a lot of talk, but not necessarily a lot of media coverage on this. So we have some examples of shortening windows to apply for mail ballots, which is Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Kentucky, New Mexico, New York. Shortening window to return a mail ballot, imposing stricter signature requirements, ID requirements. A lot of states, including Wyoming, Utah, South Carolina, Texas, Ohio, Oklahoma, New Hampshire twice, Nebraska, Indiana, Missouri, Georgia, Florida, Arkansas, twice. Restrict drive-through or curbside voting. Alaska, that was popular during the pandemic to get people to not gather. And also restrict who's allowed to vote absentee. Texas had one of those. Challenges that risk disenfranchising eligible voters. Florida, Georgia, Utah, Wyoming. And ban snacks and water to voters and waiting in line. That was a Florida bill. Thank you, Ron DeSantis. And limiting early voting days or hours. Some of those times have gotten a lot shorter. So, And then as far as election interference laws go, you have not as many, but a nice swath here in the South and Midwest, and then, well, actually, pretty much the South, except for Mississippi, Tennessee, and South Carolina, and then Texas, and then Oklahoma, Kansas, here for the Midwest, and the Dakotas and Arizona out west. Um, and a lot of those were in reaction to in trying to figure out how to run a presidential election during a pandemic in 2020 was trying to figure out how to allow access to voting while respecting pandemic requirements. Because of the urgency of the moment, a lot of election workers, county clerks, secretaries of state took unilateral action and just kind of created new processes out of whole cloth. The following legislative session, they stopped a lot of that. So, um, it says here these new laws also tend to criminalize official election worker conduct that helps expand access to voting. For example, it's now a crime in several states for election officials to send mail ballots or mail ballot applications to voters who did not request them, establish mail ballot drop boxes, and register new voters on election day and allow them to vote in that election. An Alabama law bans curbside voting and makes it a crime for an election worker to take a ballot inside or outside of a polling place to help a voter who has trouble entering or moving about the space. This law places poll workers at risk of prosecution for trying to facilitate early voting trying to facilitate voting for elderly voters and individuals with disabilities. Additionally, 6 states have imposed criminal bans on election officials accepting private funds for election administration. In 2020, third-party donations helped offset election funding shortfalls in jurisdictions across the country. Now, many election officials risk prosecution for accepting much-needed supplements to public funding. Iowa, South Dakota, and Texas made it a crime for election workers to deny partisan poll watchers sufficient latitude to observe voters in election processes without clearly outlining what is sufficient. For example, Texas's law requires that poll watchers be granted reasonably effective observation, exposing election workers to possible criminal prosecution based on differences of opinion on where observers can stand or what information they can hear. At a trial on the law, election workers testified that they had, quote, no idea what it means to not be reasonably effective, and that they have, quote, fear over the legal consequence of what occurs with the poll watcher. Other kinds of interference laws give partisan actors unprecedented authority over elections. For example, new laws in Florida and Georgia give political appointees more control over the enforcement of election crimes. Some voters in Florida have already faced the fallout. The state's new election police unit has instigated prosecutions that seemed intended to intimidate eligible voters. Finally, at least 3 states empower statewide actors to seize control of local election administration. Arkansas now allows the partisan State Board of Election Commissioners to remove local election officials and take over the administration of local elections based on any violation of election law they deem severe, even if inadvertent. Georgia similarly has increased partisanship of the State Elections Board and given it the power to meddle with local election boards. Texas has authorized the politically appointed Secretary of State to exercise intense control over the day-to-day election administration of Harris County, the state's largest county and home to Houston. And then it goes into election interference laws in all the different states and what they've done. And then expansive voting laws, making it easier for people to vote, has also happened pretty nationwide. Don't know what we're missing in Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Missouri, Iowa, and South Dakota, and Alaska, but there's definitely been some expansion as well. So in terms of, like, in Arizona, requires accessible vote by mail options for blind and visually impaired voters. Colorado improved multilingual ballot access. Connecticut created and required 14 days of early in-person voting. Delaware established automatic voter registration. And so on it goes. There also, I don't know if it talks about in this article about state legislatures and the electoral college, but there's been movement on that as well. So, like I said, I thought this was very interesting. It was a really great breakdown of how voting has changed since 2020 that I thought it was important to go over. So, let me, and then maybe we'll do a map. Here, we'll do this. Let me check my notes. Let's see. Oh, I have the McDonald's ice cream machine. So I wanted to mention, this is funny. We're not going to talk about Ukraine this week. Um, so Lena Khan over at the Federal Trade Commission recently enacted a new rule allowing McDonald's franchisees to repair their own ice cream machines, which means the ice cream machines at McDonald's will probably start working again. Now, here's how that whole thing started. McDonald's, on purpose, bought ice cream machines, or required their franchisees to buy ice cream machines that basically were intended to break down unless they were cleaned in a very particular way and reprogrammed in a very particular way so that the company that made them could make money sending out technicians to fix the ice cream machines. There was no ability for the franchisees to fix them themselves, reset them themselves, or anything like that. They had to call a guy at great expense. What Lena Khan has done is she has broken that, kind of payola sort of thing and allowed franchisees to fix their own ice cream machines, which means if you are enjoying McDonald's ice cream on a regular basis, that is a victory from the Biden administration. And I wanted to mention that because I thought it was incredibly funny and incredibly entertaining and was worth mentioning. So now I want to turn to the election. Now, I found a cool map situation. Thought I heard something. I found a cool map situation that's really cool and interesting, and we're gonna go through, kind of where I think the election sits right now. But I want to talk a lot about polling. I want to talk a lot about the state of the race and kind of where we're at with things. So let's review. Let's start with that. Let's review. So last fall, there was a lot of nervousness. I took a lot of phone calls of people that were nervous about Joe Biden. I mean, he was never really the pick to begin with, and people were like, he's really old, he seems doddering, all this type of thing. And we got through the holidays and people were nervous, and I'm kind of like, but who are you going to replace him with? You lose the power of incumbency. That's really huge. We already kind of knew Trump was going to run again. And so we were set up for another Trump-Biden show-off. This was enthusiastic for absolutely nobody. Then we get to the State of the Union in January. I live streamed that. And it seemed like Biden was great. It seemed like he was powerful, he was robust, he was ready to go. Biden 2024 on the road. We still didn't quite know what VP Harris was doing. She had been sidelined. Molly Jungfast had written an article saying, please do something, anything. You're the first woman vice president. Please pick a thing and figure it out because you're in the mud. That was in February. Then we fast forward to June. The campaign's underway. Biden's doing okay, but not great. His hearables aren't great. They're running on Bidenomics. That's not working. People are mad about inflation. The economy, the numbers are good, but the pessimism is present everywhere. And we get to the June debate, June 27th, the day that this race began to change. And Biden goes to the debate against Trump and absolutely just kind of bites it. The first 20 minutes were painful to watch. If you want to see me put my head on the desk, you can go watch the live stream from then. And just, try to handle that. And that started a 6-week conversation that ended with Biden in an unprecedented manner leaving the race and 20 minutes later endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. Fast forward to we have the month of Kamala. It's the convention, it's endorsements, it's fundraising, it's picking Tim Walz. Biden brilliantly does this the Monday after the Republican National Convention. They had spent all week attacking him. He's out of the picture. I think people have even kind of forgotten he's the president at this point. All this sort of thing. And we are a go for Kamala. And that was in late July, early August. And it has been 3.5 months of the Harris Walz campaign. And all the, on all the celebrity endorsements that have happened, all the other crazy things that have happened. We had the debate with Kamala and Trump's refusal to have another. We had the vice presidential debate, which seemed weirdly kind of normal and sort of okay. And I remarked at the time how different this race would be if it weren't Trump and Harris, and how, it would be different if it was Vance and Walz. We had the whole did Vance make love to a couch situation. Just so many things and so many moments and all this type of thing. And now that leads us to today. The polls have been up and down. Coming out of the kind of month, the August, which was the month of Kamala, the polls were going way in her favor. Favorables were up, polling was up, Trump's numbers were going way down. Between then and now, that is narrowed a lot, at least according to the polls. And obviously the swing states have been very important. And in fact, let me switch screens. We'll get a map up. Here we go. So obviously, our swing states are Pennsylvania, are Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, even North Carolina has been somewhat in play. And so we're having a lot of, questions here. Between these states, there are 77 electoral votes. And so we have, we have a lot of campaigning in these particular areas, especially because, not North Carolina. The last person in North Carolina was Barack Obama in 2012. But Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, a lot of these states shifted during the Trump years. In 2016, Trump very famously won Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, got him the White House. He also won Arizona in 2016, but not Nevada. And then those shifted back to Biden in 2020. So the question still has been, where, what is happening here? What is going on? How are these states going to vote? Because they have enough electors, it's going to matter. Mostly because the rest of the country is basically sort of set. Now, going into this, basically according to the polling, all of these except Arizona, how do I get... I'm still working on my map control. Oh, I need to select Republican. There we go. All of these states, except Arizona, which is +2 for Trump, are basically within the margin of error for Kamala. So, the question has been, given the rest of the country, how close could this be? Now, there are a couple other sort of notable things. Texas has been very close. And so has Florida has been very close, which I think is really interesting. They're both sort of lean Republican, but Texas, it's within a point. Florida, it's within 2 points. I never thought Florida would be that close. But Florida's even kind of in play, and they've actually been sending some surrogates down there to campaign for her. So it's kind of been a very interesting dynamic. Now, here's what's thrown the whole world of polling into a tizzy. Because right now the New York Times has Harris up 2. 538 has Harris up 2. The betting markets have Trump winning. That's the state right now. Now, last night, on Sunday, Ann Seltzer, a very famous pollster in Iowa, put Kamala Harris +2 in Iowa. Now, this changes the race in a lot of ways. Barack Obama was the last person to win Iowa in 2012. The same time he won Ohio. And both of those have been solidly red since then, for 2016 and 2020. No variance. We weren't even considering them swing states. No one cared. Now, what's very interesting is with Ann Seltzer's poll at +2 in Iowa, it has everyone else questioning if the rest of the country is more that way than not. So, let's set the map and we'll talk. So, let me do the Democrats first. California, Oregon, Washington, Maine District 1, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. New Jersey is supposed to be in play, but I wonder about that. Delaware, Maryland, Virginia is a swing state, but it's close enough. She's probably going to get Virginia. North Carolina is a swing state, obviously. I keep hearing something. And then, who are we missing? Oh, Nebraska District 1. Who are we missing? And Vermont. New Hampshire's a toss-up. Could go either way there. So that's the Democrats set. Switching to Republicans, we have Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. I'm going to call Arizona a lean. Kansas, although some are saying Kansas is a lean, we'll put it as lean. Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. Actually, Georgia, I take that back. Georgia, they're within the margin of error. We'll call that a toss-up. Tennessee, South Carolina, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, South Dakota, and the rest of Nebraska. Democrat states I forgot include Minnesota and Illinois. And over here for Maine 2, we have lean Republican. So, and let's do Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska's Republican, and Hawaii is Democrat. All right. That is a Kamala Harris win. Now, and this is why people are a bit frightened, because let's say the Iowa number is real, but that's not true for Ohio. Let's put Ohio back in the Republican. We're getting closer. It's a narrow victory. It's better for Trump now. But let's assume for a moment that there's a margin of error that gives us Georgia, maybe. Maybe we get New Hampshire, not much, but it's nice to have. Say we do get Iowa, but not Ohio. Let's not be too prideful. Some people think we're going to get Kansas. I think that's wishful thinking. It could get her Arizona. We're up to 305. We passed 270 a while ago. And here's the big heavy hitters. And here's where I think if Donald Trump loses either of these, he's in deep trouble. What I think is interesting is if Ann Seltzer's poll indicates Kamala Harris is doing better than we think, we could have a lean blue Texas, maybe even a lean blue Florida. I don't think that's real personally, but there's, with the Ann Seltzer poll now in the mix, this all of a sudden kind of has these different potentials. Now, to the Republican point, some people think New Jersey might be a lean red. I don't think those numbers are real, but there's a potentiality. A lot of people say Arizona is solidly Trump country. I could buy that. I personally think Trump gets Florida. I think Trump gets Kansas. I don't think that's really a question. But even so, you end up with a you still end up with a hard map for him to win. Even if you let's add back in Texas, it's 251. You would need her to really bite it in the Sun Belt. Let's say New Jersey sticks to patterns and stays Democrat, you're at 294. So, given what we know, that something's happening in Iowa, the map could look, I mean, this is a winning map for Kamala Harris, by the way. Say she does get Iowa. Total fluke. Gets Iowa. Yes, she gets Virginia, which is probably going to happen. She picks up North Carolina. That's a winning. Now, let's say she loses North Carolina. 278 to 263. That's a winning map for Kamala Harris. Now, let's presume the Ann Seltzer poll is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Iowa goes red. We're still at 259 for the Republicans. Which means Trump has to flip Georgia red in order to get across the line, which I don't think is going to happen. I think also, I mean, so, you know, so for him, North Carolina is a must win. For her, it's a nice to have. I think also, you know, given other situations, in order for, I mean, that puts him at 275. So I think really it could come down, kind of like last time, it could come down to Georgia if he wins North Carolina and he wins Arizona. Now, let's assume Arizona is a toss-up. Let's assume North Carolina is a toss-up. We're still at 299 for Kamala and 232 for Trump. And that's with everything. So his paths to win are so much narrower. This is still a winning map for Kamala Harris. So really what we've kind of learned from our little thought experiment is Trump has to win Georgia. That's kind of the moral of the story. And given the amount of early voting coming in, bearing in mind, as of this recording, at 7:54 p.m. on Monday, November 4th, 66 million people have early voted. Bearing in mind, last time we had a total turnout of 160 million votes. That means a third of the electorate nationwide has already voted. So the question now is, we'll put DC for Democrats. I forgot about DC. So basically when I say it all goes down the Sun Belt, if we end up in a situation where Trump wins North Carolina and she gets Arizona, or even if she loses Arizona but keeps Nevada, which is honestly the likelier scenario, this is a winning map for Kamala Harris at 275. So really, Trump has to have Georgia. He can't really get anywhere without Georgia. And the situation for him gets worse if that Iowa poll is real. If Ann Seltzer's right and that Iowa poll is real, it gets worse, not better for him. Then even with Georgia, he's still short by an electoral vote. Then we actually end up in a situation where we have nobody with a majority. We have Democrats at 265, Republicans at 269. We have no one with a majority. It goes to the House and Trump wins. And this map here, this tied map, is a very, very real possibility. There is a very, very real possibility that we don't end up with a solid map on. We don't end up with a solid winner out of this election. And I've been saying it for a while, but it's true. We could actually end up with a map like this where Ann Seltzer's right and Iowa goes to Harris. And she absolutely dominates the blue wall in the upper Midwest, all this type of thing, gets Virginia, Maryland, everything else, but doesn't do it in the Sun Belt, and Trump wins because he'll go to the House and he will win. That's a very real possibility as well. That is 110% a thing that could happen. So, you know, it's a lot. You know, it's a lot to think about, sort of thing. So really, I think it comes down to the Sun Belt of, if you want a majority and not have it go to the House, you really need North Carolina or Georgia if you're Kamala Harris. You really need, it's all going down the Sun Belt. It's the story is North Carolina, the story is Georgia, the story is Arizona. You can even lose Georgia and still, let me go back here. You can even lose Georgia and still be okay if you can pick up Arizona and Nevada together, or with North Carolina. Now, if you don't have North Carolina or Georgia, you need Nevada and Arizona to get 276 for the Democrats. So, all of this to say There's a lot of potentials tomorrow night. I will be live streaming all night long. Polls of the devil. That is true. I will be live streaming all night long. I'm going to be starting streaming at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to do some commentary beforehand. We're going to have trivia. I've written a whole bunch of historical trivia, state trivia questions, all this type of things. We're going to play some games. We're going to have some fun. Um, and, uh, and we're going to watch the returns. I will have the big map up so we can fill in the states as we go along. We'll watch some Steve Kornacki. We'll watch some ABC. We'll watch some NBC. All this. We'll kind of go through the different networks and kind of see what everybody's saying, see what the pundits are punditing. All this stuff. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of fun. So bring your snacks, bring your drinks, strap in, all this type of thing. It's going to be a fun time. So with that, that's the hour. I don't want to keep you too long because we all have busy lives. So let me catch you tomorrow night. So I'll be back tomorrow night. If I'll be on Twitch, I'll be on YouTube, I'll be on Facebook. So make sure to go to CameronJournal.com and follow those there. Follow me on socials. I'll be retweeting, as the night goes on, and tweeting the night as the night goes on. All this type of thing. There's also going to be a fun moment tomorrow night. Where we're actually going to go dip into another live stream on my phone at the same time, because I'm going to go do a little 5-minute thing for another show that I'm connected to. So that's going to be fun as well. That's going to happen at 8:45 Eastern, I think. So, yeah. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal. Make sure to check me out on Facebook, Cameron O'Cowan. All the links are on my YouTube channel. All the links are at CameronJournal.com. But at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow night for the 2024 presidential election with Trump Vance versus Harris Walz. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.